You're all welcome to be seated. Hey! You can just see the top of their heads as they're walking by. It's very cute. We're at the beginning, Rabbi Aaron. The end of the beginning. That's true.
The third
We're at the end of the beginning.
3 of 3.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. Shabbat shalom. Notice I don't say anything else. It is the first Shabbat, right? The first non-festival Shabbat of 5785, Shabbat Beresheet. Yesterday, we celebrated the end and the beginning, which we always do on Simchat Torah. We read the very last words of the Torah. We start with the very beginning of the Torah. And so now we are in Parashat Beresheet, the first portion of our Torah portion on the first Shabbat of the year. And I want to actually go back to basics a little bit today. But basics are not always so easy. I want to talk about faith. Right? And I want to ask two questions this morning. One, what does it mean to have faith? And two, what does Parashat Beresheet teach us about faith? Okay, those are the two questions that I want to ask this morning. So what do we think? Let's start with the first question before we get into Parashat Beresheet itself. What does it mean to have faith? You have to believe. Believe in what? Okay, from a Jewish perspective, believe in Hashem, right? If we talk about faith in general, we can have faith in ourselves, faith in other people, faith in God, faith in our government, which is a little hard sometimes, right? We can have faith in all of those different sorts of things, right? And Sophia is arguing that that is belief. Okay, I think it's more than that, though. I think it's a good start, but I think there's more than that.
I think, well, I just wanted to add two things. I think one of them, fundamental, is tikvah. I think faith and hope go along really well together.
Mm-hmm.
It's an outlook. Maybe it's the idea. It's not, I wouldn't call it magical thinking. Some people might say it's magical thinking, but I don't think it is. But I think we talk about faith in hope, faith in God and faith in the government. I think we also have to have faith in ourselves. Torah gives us agency. Torah is talking to us. It's either you in the first person or you, it's either you singular or you plural.
Okay, so there's a lot of things to unpack. Let me unpack that for a second, just so everybody can hear it. No, that's good. So you started by saying that faith and tikvah, hope, are connected to one another, right? And that faith also is not just an external thing, but it's potentially an internal thing. That our tradition teaches us that we need to have faith in ourselves, as well as faith in God, faith in Torah, faith in those sorts of things. Okay? Bernie.
So to me, there's also an element of trust for things that are beyond our control.
Okay.
Or we don't think are in our immediate control.
Okay. So trust is, right? So we've got hope, we've got trust as sort of concepts that are attached to faith. And there's trust. So let's put a finer point on it. It's not just trust in things that are beyond our control,
It'll work out.
but trust that things that are beyond our control are actually going to work out.
Yeah.
Right? Now, especially when we have faith in God, right? This aspect of faith in God to say, God has a plan, and even if I don't know it, right? Even if it's beyond my ability to understand, the faith comes in because I trust that God is going to take care of things the way they need to be taken care of, whether I understand it or not.
But all of that gets messed up when we realize that we can make a choice that, of our own free will.
Yes.
Sort of undoes all
Yeah, so Bernie brings up a very good problem, right? And a very real problem, especially since we're starting in the book of Genesis, right? Free will, our ability to make choices, kind of mucks that up a little bit, right? It doesn't make it so clean because, right, we may have faith that God's plan is going to go the way it's supposed to, but if we have the ability to choose, can we mess up God's plan? Potentially. All right, and we did, and right, so that we're gonna have to deal with that somewhere vis-a-vis faith, right? We're gonna put a pin in it for a moment, but I think we're gonna have to come back to that and deal with that somewhere vis-a-vis faith. Michal.
I feel like faith borders on commitment because faith isn't like a momentary thing, just like commitment isn't a momentary thing.
I like that. So the word that Michal is attaching to faith is commitment, because neither faith nor commitment are momentary things. They are celebrating the joy of Shabbat. It's okay. Yes, I think that's right. Anything else? Yes. I'm not used to seeing you over here. Say it again? Oh, I like that. Len is saying that if we have faith, we overcome fear. Right? Faith is a way to actually deal with fear by, again, and I'm actually going to accrete all of these things together by having, right, by having hope and by having trust and by seeing this as a commitment, it helps us overcome fear. All of those things together work very, very nicely. Yeah.
And when Len was saying about overcoming fear, it brings to mind the images that we have in the Shoah when they're going to the chambers and they're singing Ami Ma'amim, even in their death, which is that idea. I believe, I have faith. Like they're still saying, like I have faith that.
Right. Even in the most difficult times, and you brought up the Shoah, right? Even in those most difficult times, we can still show faith and we can still overcome the fear and have the trust that the larger plan is going to work out. All of those things together.
I think a corollary to trust, it helps us, when we don't understand things, like you said, we have to have confidence anyway of the unknown.
Right. That confidence, that ability to say, it's going to be okay. I feel that. I like that. So now to the harder question, because if you thought that was easy, right? Now to the harder question. So what does Parashat Beresheet, this story of creation, teach us about faith? From nothing came to this. Take the next step. What is that? How does that help your faith? Where did it come from? Right? There must be something there that is looking out for us. There's this order, right? And that helps us have faith. Okay? I like that. Howard? Michal? Ooh, nice. Michal says, B'Tselem Elohim, the fact that we are created in the image of God helps our faith that there's that connection between us, right? It's easier to have faith in those people with whom you have that strong connection, right? It's a lot easier to have faith in your parents or in your good friends than the stranger. So B'Tselem Elohim creates that connection between us and between God that helps give us faith. Good. Anything else? What does Parashat Beresheet teach us about faith? Creation. A little more than that. I agree with you. That it's good. I'll add a word to purpose. Right? It is hard to have faith if you don't believe there is purpose. Right? Because if everything is random, if everything is purposeless, faith doesn't make any sense. Faith in what? Faith in the fact that things are random? I guess you could say that. Right? Actually, I'm going to be quoting Rabbi Sachs in just a few moments. One of the things that he says is, he doesn't have enough faith to be an atheist. Right? To be a true atheist actually takes a great deal of faith. Not in God, but in things that you can't prove and you're just going to accept because you can't prove them.
So, but even if everything were just
Random, okay?
faith,
God forbid.
faith is a construct, allows us to bring some order to that randomness.
So, yes, so I see what you're saying, Bernie. I'll repeat it in case everybody didn't hear. Bernie is saying that even if everything were just random, no, but one could argue, Bernie's not arguing, but one could argue that faith is a construct that allows us to bring order to the randomness. So then faith is not real per se. Faith is just something that we build to be able to make order out of the chaos. It makes, well, yes, I mean, I guess if we create it, if we think it, it's real. I could argue, you could argue that. Okay. Anything else? What does Bob?
So there's purpose, but also we know that we are part of that purpose. We are participating.
It brings us that connection, right? It was one of the things, right? We are part of that creation. So the purpose brings us trust, brings us hope, and then the connection piece is because we're part of it. Yes?
That the fact that he created in 6 days, on the seventh day he rested, so that gives deeper meaning and purpose.
It adds to the purpose, right? That there's not only purpose, but there's meaning to our lives. And those two things are very different. And we could have a whole sermon just on the difference between purpose and meaning in our lives, right? So there's a purpose, and then there's also meaning, is what the Torah is bringing to us. So I want to flip it on its head. And let me rephrase that. Rabbi Sachs flipped it on its head. And I want to share, because I'd never really thought about it this way, and I was reading it sometime during the Chagim. It was a blur. I'm not sure exactly when. And it really got me thinking about faith and about this and what we can learn from it. And so he starts by looking at the verses that are actually highly problematic for a lot of different reasons. Chapter 1, verse 26. You can find it on page 9. This is in the creation of human beings. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, all the creeping things that creep on the earth." And God created man in God's image. In the image of God, God created him, male and female, God created them. Okay? So there is a very famous section of Talmud that actually deals with these verses. It is in Masechet Sanhedrin 38b, and it reads as follows. I'm going to read you that, and then we're going to ask, what does it tell us about faith? When the Holy One, blessed be God, came to create man, he created a group of ministering angels and asked them, "Do you agree that we should create man in our image?" That's the us part, right? Let us create man. Who's God talking to? According to the Talmud, the angels. And they replied, "Sovereign of the universe, what will be man's deeds?" And God showed them the history of mankind. And the angels replied, from Psalm 8:5, "What is man that you are mindful of him?" In other words, let them not be created. They are a mess. And then the Talmud says, God destroyed the angels. He created a second group and asked them the same question. They gave the same answers. God destroyed them. He created a third group of angels, and they replied, "Sovereign of the universe, the first and second group of angels you told you not to create man, and it did not avail them. You did not listen. What then can we say but this? The universe is yours, do as you wish." Then God created man. And when it came to the generation of the flood and to the generation of the builders of Babel, The angel said to God, "Were not the first angels right? See how great is the corruption of mankind." Then God replied, "Even to old age I will not change, even to gray hair I will still be patient." That's from Isaiah. All right, folks. What does this teach us about faith? What's the chiddush here?
You don't always get it right.
Yeah? Keep going. We're almost there.
It changes.
Folks, who has faith here? Yes! Right? God has faith. The story of Genesis is not about our faith, it's about God's faith in us. That's the chiddush here. Right? That's the chiddush here. And it doesn't matter. God sees everything. God knows everything. And God still chose to create us. And as we heard yesterday, we're not going to read it today because we're in a different part of the portion. But as we heard yesterday, when God created human beings, tov me'od. Now you look at this world and we have a hard time saying tov me'od. So how can God possibly say tov me'od? Because God has trust, and God has hope, and God has all of these things that we defined as faith in human beings.
Is it out of his control?
So this goes back now to answering your question. The answer is yes, it is out of God's control, because free will puts it out of God's control. Now, God has the ability to destroy the world, which God almost did a couple times. That is in God's control to respond. But our sin, our evil, our choices, according to our tradition, are out of God's control. Right? We have to choose. And God ultimately, in spite of what the angels, 2 batches of angels, right? 2 batches got thrown away before they finally learned, yeah, maybe we should just kind of go along with this for the time being. Okay? But what a revolutionary way to start the Torah. We focus so much on Torah being about us and about our faith and how we should relate to God. And what they're saying here is no. The true act of faith, at least in the beginning, is God's creation of the universe and God's creation of us. That was an act of faith. That we human beings were ultimately going to find our way. It may take a long time, but we're going to find our way back to God. And Rabbi Sachs really, in very interesting ways, deals with this in a couple of different ways. One of the, and by the way, this is from Judaism's Life-Changing Ideas. I totally thought, because you guys have been reading that, I totally thought you were going to have that. Usually you jump in with, oh yeah, Rabbi, all right?
I wasn't going to give it away.
Thank you, I appreciate that. But one of the things that he says here, right, is he says, when I stood at Auschwitz-Birkenau, so he had gone to a trip to Auschwitz, to the death camp. The question that haunted me was not, where was God, right? So often we hear, well, where is God? Why should we have faith in God? Where was God during Auschwitz? And what he said here was so powerful. He says, where was God? God was in the command, you shall not murder. God was in the words, you shall not oppress the stranger. God was saying to humanity, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. We have the morals and values in all of this. God is saying, where were you? Where were you? Right? I've given you the tools. I've given you all the guidance. Where were you? And the fact that God sees that, and the angel, right? And knows that that's who we are, and still creates this universe for us, and still creates this world for us, and still creates us, shows an incredible depth of faith that we can now emulate, that we can now say, okay, I get it. If God can have faith in us, maybe we can too.
Well, I like what you're saying, and it feels good to me as a modern person, but there's a problem with all the punishments that God pronounces. Oh, right, or
Yeah.
will happen.
Look, faith and free will does not protect you from consequences. That's, by the way, what we're still trying to learn today, right? We have the right for free speech. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be consequences for what you say. You can say anything you want, but there are going to be consequences for that. You yell fire in a crowded room, there are going to be, there's going to be consequences to that, right? So free choice and consequences are not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, if you know the consequences before you make your choice, then you can truly say it was a free choice, right? It's when you don't know the consequences beforehand that it gets a little more messy. But if I'm a parent, right, and my kid, keeps going and getting the cookies, and I say, look, if you take a cookie again, you are not going to have dessert for the next week. I'm not impinging on their free will. They now know the choice, they now know the consequences, and they have the freedom to choose. Are they going to take it or are they not going to take it?
A whole other topic probably, but God does lose faith many times.
So, Neil is bringing up a really interesting point, and I struggle with it, which is there are lots of times that we see in the Torah that God loses faith. I would actually argue that if we really look deeply into that, we could read it in one of two ways that would change that. You could read it as, I've never seen God losing faith. I see God despairing and getting frustrated, but never truly losing faith. But B, every single time God was waiting, with the exception of, and potentially even with Noah, right? God was waiting for human beings to say, wait a second, you can't do that. And Moses did many times, right? So, but that's again, God testing our choices. Like, are you going to stand up for your fellow people? That's your job, right? It's not where was God in all of this, but where was the world? Where was the United States that knew what was going on in Germany and chose not to do something? That's not a God question, right? This war could have been over years beforehand, right? Years beforehand. They knew what Auschwitz-Birkenau was. We know that. And they chose not to do that for their reasons. So where was the United States? Where was the rest of the world? Now, eventually, the world stood up and stopped the Nazis. Took a long time, right? We're going to see how long it's going to take for the world to stand up and stop, the radical Islamists that are basically wanting the same thing. We'll see. What? Well, it's not the world standing up, it's Israel standing up right now. But we'll see. I mean, at some point in time, the world needs to say, this doesn't work. All right, that's a different sermon. Very different sermon. All right, back to my point being, I want you to leave today, and I want you to begin this year knowing that God has faith in us. I'm not up here pounding my pulpit saying, have faith in God. I'm pounding my pulpit today to say, remember that God has faith in us, and now it's our job to not let that faith down. Shabbat Shalom.